Inspiration for Teachers podcast, bringing you dynamic and inspirational educator interviews. Our fascinating guests share their professional challenges and creative resolutions for success. Discover their workable strategies, ideas, and resources to reach your educational goals. And now your host, Kelly Long.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Inspiration for Teachers. I'm your host, Kelly Long, and we are diving on into the Creativity and Innovation series. You have already had the opportunity to listen to my first episode with Andreas, and that was a really insightful, very engaging episode about how does he use learning walks, art and poetry to stimulate creative thinking in his teaching practice. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to that episode, please do go back to that one because it's totally fantastic and there are some great ideas that you can steal and you can embed into your own teaching practice. So please do go ahead and listen to that episode. Here on this episode today, I have a former guest from the show. Her name is Joanne Miles and she was here on the coaching series back on episode 77. But today I've invited her back because she's been doing a lot of interesting work with many institutions about creative approaches to how do we enhance our own teaching practice and really embedding that creativeness into our pedagogy. So I've invited her back because we're going to really look at the classroom practice and what creative models you can pursue and use to unlock and develop your professional teaching practice. So I'm super thrilled that she's going to be joining me here today. So let's go ahead and dive on into that interview between myself and Joanne Miles. Hello and welcome back to the show, Joanne. I'm so pleased that you are joining me here again.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. It's lovely to be back.
And if you are new to the show, then you won't have heard Joanne before, but she joined us back on season 3 on episode 77, where we were looking at coaching and mentoring talent in education. So if you're interested in that field, please go back and do listen to Joanne there. But I'm so pleased that you're back on the show again today, Joanne. And I would just like to introduce you back into the show and as our expert guest today, just give a little bit background information as to what you've been doing in schools and colleges.
Okay, super. So I've been a teacher and a teacher trainer for the last 25 years. I worked predominantly in sixth form colleges and the FE sector for many years in a teaching and training role. And since then, I've been working for the Learning and Skills Network, supporting schools and colleges in improving their teaching and learning. And I now work for myself, doing that all over the country. And a big part of my work is trying to encourage teachers to be more creative, more innovative in their practice and to share that effectively for the benefit of their learners.
So that's perfect because that's exactly what we're looking at on the show here today. We're discussing creativity and innovation in the classroom. And I know that you've got a lot of experience in this, but before we dive into all that knowledge that you've got, Joanne, and look at the kind of models that you've used and what you found to be effective, let's just start off by setting the scene a little bit and just, in your opinion, why do you think there is this real need for creativity and innovation in the classroom?
I think there's something about needing to stay fresh in your own practice and realising that over time you develop a toolkit of approaches that you feel work, but that there is this danger of becoming slightly complacent and maybe slightly in a rut with your work. Because things become comfortable and easy to plan and easy to execute. So for me, part of it is staying really fresh mentally and to challenge yourself to be a little bit more creative and to try things in a different way and see what that brings for yourself and the students. Because when I watch teachers in class who are trying new ideas, often they're finding better ways of tackling issues they have in the classroom or behaviour with particular learners. So this creativity can often bring enhanced learning for the students, which I think is a major benefit.
I like how you said that because we do have a lot of seasoned listeners who tune in regularly to the show who, you know, to teach an old dog new tricks is quite difficult, but I think you're quite right to stay fresh in your teaching and also stay abreast of what actually is coming out from educational research, because sometimes there seems to be a bit of a breakdown between the two. So you can be very good teacher, very effective teacher, but yeah, you're right, it can get a bit stale. So we're going to look at that from a teaching and learning perspective, but I just want to delve into the pupil a little bit because they all obviously have a certain level of responsibility themselves in this process. So what would you say is the need for the student's point of view?
I think from the student's point of view, it's about them engaging with different ways of learning, different ways of thinking about the activities they're doing in class. And that's fostered when teachers are trying different approaches, different activities, different methods in the classroom. So it's also helping the learners get that big range of approaches. So, for example, I've seen some work recently with teachers on note-making skills with learners in the classroom, and really exposing learners to taking Venn diagrams and using mind mapping and using spider diagrams, and really getting learners to try different approaches and then reflect on the effectiveness for them. And so I think that creativity works in both ways. It's for the teacher to keep the freshness and to incorporate the new ideas coming through from research, but it's also for the learners getting a wider toolkit to enhance their own practice as learners.
Now, I know, Joanne, that you've used a number of different models with regards to creativity and innovation, and you've seen and experimented with lots of different ways and approaches to it. So can you give us an example that you've seen highly effective, or one of those models that you've seen to actually bring about a change in creativity and innovation for the teacher, but also how that has kind of inspired the learner to think more deeply about their learning?
For me, the most effective model that I've seen in practice and that I've been involved in is one called the supported experiments model. And if you go online and Google, you'll see that Jeff Petty is one of the key advocates of this cycle. And it's a really simple cycle that teachers can use to think about their own practice and maybe collaborate with a colleague. But it can equally be used at a whole college or whole school level as a culture change model, if you like, to get everybody innovating and sharing practice more effectively. And it has very simple stages. It has a first stage where you look at issues that you have in the classroom, areas that you wish to develop, skills that you want to enhance with the learners, and you identify an area of practice, therefore, that you want to work on and explore. You then go to the wider pedagogy, the wider research set, and look at current approaches, current thinking on those areas, and look at something that you may be able to then explore through an experiment. You then spend a period of time, ideally, in my experience, it's kind of 6 months to a year, exploring that method in the classroom with the students, getting feedback from the students on the method, sharing with colleagues glitches, what's working, to help you actually really delve deeply into that method in the classroom. At the end of the cycle, there's always a stage of sharing practice through maybe online resources, a write-up or a case study of your experiment, and also some sharing events. So I'm seeing schools and colleges run speed dating, or like a learning fair where people can share, or a gallery walk where people present posters. So you've caught the good practice from people's work so that people can look at that in the future as well.
And when you said there's a step in there where you're looking at putting the experiment in place, I mean, how tight does this process have to be? Because I see that there's this 6 months to a year to really test it out, which I think, just doing something once isn't going to be effective, and over a period of time we're going to see a change. But from an educational background point of view, I know that when you're looking at experiments, there are different things that you need to consider. You need to validate what you've tested. Have you truly tested it? Has it truly been effective? I mean, that can be quite a complex process, and it can also be quite a heavy process in terms of the impact that it has on the teacher, because it takes a lot of planning, all of that. So how tight does that process have to be in order to be effective? I know that sounds like a bit of a silly question, but if we're asking people to take that first step to really think about creativity in the classroom and innovation, does that have to be a really tight process, or is it a case of saying, give it a go? What did you find?
I think you're really insightful to comment on this idea of the tightness, and the work that I've seen that's had the biggest impact on teachers and learners has been very well focused work, where at the beginning of the process there's a stage where teachers are really delving into what is it precisely that we want to change, that we need to improve. So it's not saying, oh, we want to improve learners' writing, for example. It might be saying, what is it within the writing that the students have particular problems with? Are we looking at grammatical accuracy? Are we looking at paragraphing? Are we looking at the written style using adjectives? It's getting teachers to refine down to something extremely concrete so that they can therefore look at research in a very focused way to select something appropriate, but that also they can therefore plan an experiment that's very tightly shaped to fit that end goal. Some of the problems I'm seeing in institutions are where the overall sense of the creative experiment is too broad. So in some institutions, I'm seeing things like, oh, we want to work on students' motivation or students' reading skills. And that's valuable, but you have to refine down to which aspect of that is going to provide the focus. So there's definitely a focusing stage. I think the second part of it is planning in detail how you would be measuring or assessing the impact of the change that you're trying to make. So, for example, I'm seeing some teachers looking at self-peer assessment in the classroom and using that to improve students' written work. Those teachers I'm seeing are looking at which points in the process will I gather learner feedback on that experience, and how will I look at their written work to see the change in that work across time. So I'm seeing teachers collect samples of students' work at different points in the process. I'm seeing some teachers have a series of groups where they're not using that method and looking at the difference in those parallel pieces of work to see if they think any change is being affected by the use of, say peer assessment checklists. So it does involve planning, but I think the secret is to get the focus very tight and specific at the beginning to not therefore overload the teacher in the experimental cycle.
And I wanted to see what your take on this word creativity is, because within that process that you've just described, it is extremely focused. It's very pinpointed from an objective point of view as to what you want to change, what do you expect the outcome to be, and that kind of vehicle of how do you get there is really important. So if we're looking at the vehicle and we're looking at the creativity approach, would you say that in the delivery it has to be really creative in how you do that? Or would you say that, because there's a bit of a disagreement as to what creativity is, would you say that the creativity is in the thinking behind what you want to do?
I think that for some people, I'm seeing people try something that's very new to them, but it may not be new in the wider sector. So for some people, it's saying, actually, I've never used peer assessment checklists in my practice. So the creativity for me is taking an established idea and creatively looking at how I adapt that into my setting and how to make it work for my students. So the creativity is more in the planning, maybe, and the structuring of the experiment than it is in the method itself. In other settings, I'm seeing people thinking, right, we've got a really big challenge with learners in punctuality, say. Let's really think in a blue sky way in terms of how to get learners into the classroom and wanting to attend the beginning of the session and being focused in that first 15, 20 minutes. And they're coming up with some really interesting ideas about incentivizing, getting learners involved in running the first 15 minutes of the session. And those ideas are not necessarily coming from a research base. They're more blue sky thinking between groups of teachers together, being very creative in terms of the method they select as well as the planning.
And you initially started off by saying how you've used these experiments. And so who was the gentleman who's Jeff?
Jeff Petty, and it's Petty. And his website, jeffpetty.com, has a lot of resources and the research base behind the value of the model. If you like, really, I mean, for me, supported experiments comes a lot from things like Kolb's learning cycle, action learning, the idea of establishing something you're going to explore and then reflecting on that with a colleague. It fits also very well with some of the points coming out of the Developing Great Teaching report around teachers needing to collaborate together, challenge each other on their thinking, and continue with a piece of development across time so that it's not a flash in the pan piece of CPD. So for me, part of the value of this cycle is the depth that you can get of having teachers in conversation together, as long as time is allocated by the senior leadership team to enable those conversations to take place.
Yeah, I think we talked about that before, didn't we? About having the right time and the right allocation of time for people to really take on board what you want them to change and make effective?
Absolutely. I'm finding that in the institutions where they're running that cycle, about every 3 weeks, you need a structured slot on the timetable where teachers can meet. So that could be a team meeting slot for an hour. It could be part of CPD or staff development time. And then when teachers have these shutdown inset days as well across the year, colleges are having a slightly bigger slot, maybe 2 to 3 hours, dedicated to the experiments where teachers can work to troubleshoot, but also to devise things like, if I'm going to get learner feedback, what am I going to put on my questionnaire to the learners? Or would I like to do that as a focus group using a colleague to get feedback from my students, in which case we need to plan that together. So for me, one of the key things is the leadership teams recognizing that creativity and innovation and collaboration needs structured time to enable it to flourish.
I couldn't agree more. So we've kind of touched on the things and the models that work. And, you know, when people are embarking on this journey, you know, we want people to succeed, but, you know, there will be some areas where they will fail, and there are lessons in that. So that is fine. But, you know, if we're to get that program off to a flying start where people are taking that step, that well-structured step into, you know, looking at creativity and innovation and specifically targeting areas of need for a student or group of students, what would you definitely say? Please do not do this, because if you do this, then you definitely will fail, and we want to take that step away from you so that you don't lose motivation, you don't give up too soon. What would you say, you know, please do not do this under any circumstances?
Right. There's actually a couple of really key pitfalls. The first one's a managerial leadership pitfall, and I've seen this happening in some institutions. Because people are very worried about driving the improvement for teaching and learning, some leaders can see this model as a tool to drive specific strategic direction for their institution. So they can say, oh, you're going to be creative and innovative, but it's only around embedding maths. They can limit the focus of the teachers, and then you do not get the creativity, the inspiration, the empowerment that this model can give teachers to really choose something that's relevant for them and their learners. So the first pitfall definitely is overshaping the focus for the experiment. To me, it needs to come from the teacher and their learners, and it needs to come up the structure, if you like, as opposed to being imposed from the top. So in the best sets of experiments that I've seen, teams may have one focus that's in common between them because they've selected it, but they may also, or alternatively, have a very individual set of experiments around a particular issue that they perceive for their group that may not be the same for a colleague. So it's that empowerment as part of the process that I think is really key. The second thing is being overambitious. As you said quite rightly at the beginning, people are very overloaded, they're stressed, they're busy, they have a lot of work to do all the time. Their experiment shouldn't be something that derails their normal practice. It needs to incorporate into how they do their planning, into how they do their reflective work with their students. So it needs the tight focus, and it doesn't need to be huge. So for some teachers, I've seen them thinking about, what do I do as one new approach to running a plenary slot to get feedback from the students on what they've learned? And they may just be changing the way they run their plenary slot and experimenting with that across time in a series of sessions. The rest of their teaching and learning is remaining the same. So I think the tight focus is another part of it, and not making it too big so that the demand is too huge. I think those two are probably the biggest pitfalls that you can fall into at the start.
Yeah, I think those are really, really important, and definitely that inverted triangle as to it has to come from the teacher, and not trying to change everything because that is just way too overwhelming. But I think small, regular changes over an extended period of time can have a huge impact, and just trying one thing at a time is really important, and getting the best out of that and getting it right, I think would really help with definitely creativity in the classroom. It's brilliant. So in a second, Joanne, you've touched on some resources, but we're going to delve into them in a bit more detail. But before we do, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. My Revision Pal is the online revision system for exam success. Many students struggle with revision, getting started, overcoming the mindset barriers, or even knowing what is an effective revision strategy. Students can learn how to pass their exams using My Revision Pal's online revision system. This 6-guided learning module program teaches students how to pass their exams using the 2 scientifically proven and most effective revision techniques. By the end of the program, students will feel more confident,
be more focused, and will have the revision skills and systems in place to pass their exams. Right now, students can enrol for free and experience the first learning module. Head over to myrevisionpal.com. That's myrevisionpal.com and sign up to experience your free trial. Okay, so Joanne, what I would like to do right now, you've talked about how we can start going and exploring those experiments and where to develop that model. But I just want to start off by thinking about what would be your best resource for getting started with creativity and innovation.
I think there are lots of different things you can use. I mean, Jeff Petty's website gives you a lot of food for thought around the research base, and also lots of research studies about evidence-based methods that people feel are effective in the classroom. I mean, there's a lot of reading that could be done. John Hattie's book, Visible Learning, gives teachers a lot of ideas about evidence-based practice. Also, Robert Marzano's work about approaches that work in the classroom can be very useful. There's a very useful website that I use frequently called the Evidence-Based Teachers Network. And that one has lots of things around top 10 methods, top 10 approaches that give teachers just a starting point to consider to see whether some of those methods may be a good place to begin. So I think one of the things at the start of this process is having a series of links on your intranet, a series of maybe video clips to show teachers around different methods and approaches that are food for thought for teachers to start thinking about areas that they may wish to explore. Because as soon as they've identified an area, they want to look at resources that can help them.
And if we were to segment those resources down, what would you say would be a starting point for a teacher that's within their early years of teaching? Where would you recommend that they go to? Because they've obviously got a lot on their plate just getting comfortable with teaching. What would really help to support them?
I think Jeff Petty's website's the best place to start. He's got a big section around supported experiments, so the whole notion of it would be great there. And then he has a section of links around different research elements, around assessment, around graphic organisers. So if you like, the teacher could get the idea of experimentation there, but also then delve into some of the research. Also on my website that you've got a link to, there are lots of different resources around how to experiment, how to work with colleagues, questions to consider, all those kinds of things that would help people to kind of begin that process. I mean, the other thing to consider is whether in your institution there is experimentation already going on and who you might want to buddy up with to do that, and whether in the network of schools that you might be linked to in your area, whether there is other experimentation happening, so you can look at how they've done that and see what they may have learned from it.
Because that was going to lead me on to my next question, which was about the seasoned professional, someone that has been in teaching a long time and is looking to, maybe push themselves. And I think at the start of the conversation, you said maybe find something fresh or a new approach or try something different. So I was going to say for that person, what should their steps be, or the tips that you would recommend for that person to go forward and to challenge themselves with this?
I think the more experienced members of staff that I'm watching are quite interested in how to incorporate very new approaches, if you like, into their practice to see where they fit and if they fit. So I'm seeing people exploring flipped learning, how to use technology outside the classroom for learners as like homework tasks or scaffolding tasks for things that you're going to do in the lesson afterwards. So bits of use of technology I'm seeing as an interesting one to explore, and things like looking at your own practice around established areas of work, like how you give feedback, for example. Some teachers recently have said to me, I've realised that I'm quite solid on giving written feedback. I'm quite good at writing comments on learners' work or books. But actually the feed forward part of the process that researchers are writing about extensively now, of getting the students to action that feedback, I am not so great at. And so some people I know have looked at how to bring their feedback into class with students and how to give them supported scaffolded time to work together, using some of the approaches that I'm seeing written about in schools called DIRT, Directed Improvement and Reflection Time for students. So really looking at an area of your practice that you feel is not 100% brilliant, because I think experienced teachers are aware some things are working fantastically, but that there are glitches. I don't think any of us, even though we've been teaching for 25 years, think that we are perfection manifest. So there's always areas that you can actually be tweaking and looking at and bringing ideas from outside to freshen those up.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you so much, Joanne. I think everything that you said today is really helpful in terms of getting started, avoiding those mistakes. But really, I think you hit the nail on the head where you said it really has to come from the teacher, and looking at not necessarily where there's a weakness, but actually asking that question: is this effective? Does it improve? And do we see how that change occurs from progressing those learners forwards in our classroom, and really taking a deep thinking, creative approach as to how can that change happen, and then looking wider around, well, what can we use in order to be our vehicle for doing that and testing it. So I think everything that you've said today has been really valuable, and I'm so pleased that you've been back on the show and sharing your amazing knowledge, because you know so much, and you've also got this wide experience of being able to go into different institutions and see what works, because one strategy or one model doesn't fit all, but you can take a variety of different techniques and approaches, and you can really make those work for you as long as you are very clear about what it is you're trying to change.
That's right, absolutely. I do think the focus is key, but also the ability to collaborate together. That the best experiments I've seen, teachers have worked together maybe in little clusters of 2 or 3. They've had that momentum from each other and that problem-solving space of talking together across time. And it's ended up being a really deep, reflective process. And it's all about people starting to own professional learning better and starting to become more reflective in a deeper way across time. And I think things like the supported experiments model really enable that to happen in amongst all the other things that we're trying to do across the year.
And I think from a teacher's perspective, seeing that value is so important, because, you want to make sure, you want to make the investment, but the investment has to be worthwhile, because you need to be able to see the change, but also see that on your own agenda. So it's not being, this is the wrong word probably, but it's not being manipulated or dumbed down by, a wider strategy.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And it's that ability to have the relevance is what creates the incredible level of enthusiasm and passion. And I mean, I've seen people take a sort of small idea and get so embroiled in the process in a great way and inspired by it. I saw a teacher develop a whole online world, a kind of package to put people into a simulation using artificial technology, incredible things that were just so much bigger than I thought would come out of the process. And then I've seen other people just develop a really simple set of questions to use for students when they're late, to talk about their motivation, the effect of being late, the benefit of coming on time, the effect on their progress over time of being late a little bit every week. So using that to engage students in becoming punctual because they realise the value of it. So small change, but which made a massive impact. So I think these things can be huge and creative and create a massive set of development for people. They can be small and very, very powerful, but that's the joy in the process, is finding your own way through that.
Well, I really thank you again for coming on the show today, Joanne. It's just been really insightful, and I'm sure people would like to explore that with you more. So how can we reach out to you?
Right. Well, I've got a simple email address, janemilesconsulting@gmail.com. And I have a WordPress website. So if you go into Google and you put WordPress plus Joanne Miles Consulting, you'll find my lovely WordPress site, which has a massive amount of stuff around teachers collaborating, teaching and learning methods, supported experiments models, coaching, all those kinds of things through the list of tabs and the filter list on the right-hand side.
And you're on social media as well, is that correct?
I absolutely am. I'm on Twitter, so at Joanne Miles 2, number 2. I'm always sharing ideas about teaching and learning in the classroom and development, and some of it's school-based and some of it's college-based and some of it's policy-based. So it's a nice broad kind of spread of things for people to look at.
Oh, well, thank you so much again for joining me on the show, Joanne. It has been fantastic having you here.
Fantastic. Lovely to talk to you, Kelly.
Thank you for joining us today on Inspiration for Teachers. For more resources, tips and advice, visit our website, inspirationforteachers.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love to connect with you. Just click like on our Facebook page at facebook.com/inspirationforteachers.